Let's talk about power sanders. Power sanders are really useful for shaping material, and it removes material a lot faster than a simple hand sander. You do want to be careful though, because if you try removing too much material too quickly on a sander, then it's likely that it's going to hurt the sander or it could hurt you. In my experience teaching, I've seen the most frequent injuries come on a sander like this, whether it's just a little scrape that needs a Band-Aid or whether it's a serious injury that needs medical attention. I think the reason that people don't take sanders as seriously is that it's just a sanding belt and it's not a saw blade or a sawtooth or things like that. However, the abrasive on power sanders can cut you just as quickly as a saw blade. So please use the same amount of care and attention that you would as you're operating any machine when you're using the sanders. In my shop here, I've got multiple sanders that I'll show you each of them. And the operation and safety is similar on each one. This is called the horizontal belt sander or edge sander. And it's nice because it has this long straight section. So if you have a larger piece or something that needs to be straightened, then the horizontal belt sander does that well. Your on off are right over here. And we want to make sure that as you're operating it, our fingers are 2 to 4 inches away from the abrasive belt. You also want to be aware of your other pinch points. Here as the belt enters into the machine, and here as the belt exits the machine over here. We just want to make sure that our fingers are clear of those areas as well. When you're going to use a sander, you always want to have your material flat to the table. If you need to have your material at a different angle, then we can change the setting of the angle on the table. But for the safest operation, you should have your material flat to the table. As you're sanding, you want to hold your material firmly, but you want to push it into the sanding abrasive very lightly. If you push too hard, then it can catch that piece of material and actually throw it. So firm on the hands, but light on the cut. Anytime you're power sanding, it's good to have a line to work towards. Otherwise, you'll probably remove more material than you intend to. So it's a good idea to always have some sort of line or mark drawn so that you can make sure that you're sanding to that mark or line. You'll notice right here I've got a little bit of a hole in my sanding belt. As you're sanding a straight section like this, take care not to let this corner get caught and thrown. Holes like this come from situations like that. So you want to make sure that you hold your material firmly or possibly set up a stop block, and then be very, very light and controlled as you sand your material. As you're sanding your material, you want to be very light on the sander. If you push too hard or hold your material on there too long, it could cause burn on your material, and it could also cause a burn line on the sander, and that area will no longer sand correctly. So just take care to sand lightly. You also don't want to sand material that will clog the abrasive belt. So things like paint, stain, varnish, things like that can clog up the abrasive belt. So just clean, dry hardwood works best. So that's the horizontal belt sander. Just remember to be patient and let the machine do the work. Let's go take a look at the disc sander. This is the disc sander. This one happens to rotate this way. So on this part of the disc, it's traveling upward, and then on this part of the disc, it's traveling downward. It's always a good idea to sand on the downward side of the disc so that it pulls your material towards the table, which is nice and supported. If you sand on the upward side of the disc, then it will want to pull your material upward. And even if you're strong enough to hold it there, it's a much safer idea just to use the downward side of the disc. Some sanders, depending on how they're manufactured, might spin the other way, or some might have a setting to allow it to spin either direction. So just remember that it's the downward side of the disc that you want to sand on. You always want to have your material flat to the table, and if you need to change the angle of the table, you can. As with other machines, make sure to keep your fingers 2 to 4 inches away from that sanding disc. This is the vertical belt sander. The vertical belt sander comes up, and so the part that you're sanding is traveling downward. That makes it nice because it is always pulling your material towards the platform. You can change the angle of this platform as needed over here, and you always want to remember to keep your fingers 2 to 4 inches away from the sanding belt. To turn the machine on, it's right down here. There's a start and a stop button. And just be aware that when you turn it turns on both the vertical and the disc sanders. Let's go talk about the spindle sander. This is the spindle sander, and it's great for interior curves. So if you happen to have a hole or a partial radius on a piece, then you can use the spindle sander to get inside that radius. You can change the spindle so that it's different sizes depending on what you're sanding. The on-off button is down below here. And remember to keep your fingers far enough away from the spindle to be safe. If you are sanding the inside of a hole, you want to make sure that the diameter of the spindle is significantly smaller than the diameter of the hole that you're sanding so that it doesn't get caught and spin your material. As with the other sanders, you keep your material flat to the platform, and you really need to take it slow on the spindle sander. It does not remove material very fast at all. So that covers the power sanders in my shop. The biggest thing to remember is keep your fingers away from the abrasive, be patient, and let the sander do the work. If you do those things, you'll stay safe as you're using the power sanders in my shop.